Hello, I'm John Lithgow. Welcome to American Cinema. During the golden age of Hollywood, the film studios became incredibly powerful. They controlled production, distribution, and exhibition. The mass production system that made companies like Ford Motors a success worked for the film studios as well. A highly efficient assembly line was built that enabled a studio to release a film a week. Adventures, comedies, romances, westerns, gangsters, musicals. Ford was famous for one model. The studios had many. But the genius of the system was that although the studios were factories, individual artists were still able to pursue their vision and create some of the best pictures ever made. Take Paramount Pictures, for example. It was the home of Billy Wilder, Joseph von Sternberg, and Ernst Lubitsch, great artists who left their individual stamp on the films they made. The Paramount story is the model of what happened in Hollywood over the last 70 years. A corporate giant which suffered with the fall of the studio system only to be rebuilt in the era of the conglomerates and turn out some of the most memorable pictures of the last 20 years, as we will see in this program narrated by Peter Coyote. The Studio System.
Every studio was a city. You have your commissary, you have your hospital where a child can be born or a person can die.
You'd walk up these streets and you'd hear people tap dancing up in the back of this lot.
We had a full orchestra of 55 people who came in every day and worked.
You knew when grandmother died or when a new baby was born or when somebody got engaged. There was a big thing going on.
And you couldn't see passes through the hills and everything. You could be anywhere.
It was an enclosed, like a cocoon. When you were in there, why, you were in another world completely.
Who wrote that scene?
The English writer Monroe, Oxley. It's the last thing he wrote before he left.
We'll have to rewrite the scene and reshoot it. It's absolute crap. People don't speak like that. Do I have any writers around here who understand the way people talk? Norman.
Yes, Monroe.
There are 4 writers on that scene tonight, and I want to see the rewrites before they shoot it.
Sure, Monroe.
How much is it going to cost to reshoot that scene?
I don't care what it costs. Make it.
I don't know what's wrong with the scene. I thought that was a pretty touching scene.
Gar Kanan put it right, Garson Kanan. He said, the trouble with movies as a business is that it's an art. And the trouble with movies as an art is that it's a business. And it is. And every one of us that makes films struggles with that. Every damn day you do it.
Know the names: Paramount, MGM, Universal, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, the Hollywood Studios. But these film companies have been so lost in movie mythology that the public knows very little about how they actually worked. They completely controlled the American movie industry during the golden age of the 30s and 40s. How were they able, again and again, to create the cinema's timeless classics, and how did they exercise their power? Paramount, historically the most profitable and powerful film corporation, is the focus of our story, which begins, like the classic studio era, at the beginning of the 30s. Every artist or technician who came to work through those famous Paramount gates was under contract. This was the first rule for running a Hollywood studio lot. Everyone was owned.
When you're in a contract, it's a family feeling.
You have a family to go to. If you have a problem, you can go to somebody on the lot that has your interest at heart. It enabled people to learn their craft inside and out. It guaranteed them employment so that you weren't afraid of failing. A failure didn't put you out on the street. And so writers wrote great things and poor things, but being under contract for a period of time, they had an opportunity to write a lot of things.
I think the studios took the position that they paid their talent, the actors and writers and directors and all, and therefore they should be happy and not want too much say and control of their own material.
Now, you were generally told what you were going to do, and if you didn't agree, you could go on suspension very easily.
Within these portals you may see such famous stars as the Marx Brothers, Chevalier, Harold Lombard, Richard Allen, Mae West, Cary Grant, and many of your other favorites. Over here on your right, playing hide and seek are Gary Cooper and Frederick Marx. Hi there, boys!
Of all studio personnel, it was the stars who were the most valuable asset to the companies in their fight for the public's attention, loyalty, and money. Their popularity guaranteed studio success, and so they were tied to companies with exclusive contracts. No one understood star power more than Paramount's founder, Adolf Zukor. As early as 1912, Zukor had had success with the film Queen Elizabeth, starring Sarah Bernhardt. Convinced there was a market for films featuring stars of the stage, Zukor had formed the Famous Players Company, based in New York, pioneering the production of feature films with established star names.
Every studio built not only its production schedule, but its entire production operation around anywhere from 2 or 3, say in the case of Universal or Columbia, to 12, 15, 20 in the case of Paramount or MGM stars.
You're Norma Desmond. Used to be in silent pictures. Used to be big.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Warner's had to produce so many Cagneys and so many Robinsons and so many Betty Davises that MGM had to produce, and so on and so forth. A kind of unity between star and genre tended to develop. And this is marketing. This is good marketing.
All right, boys. Hey. You see Mr. DeMille? Open the gate.
Mr. DeMille is shooting. You got an appointment?
No appointment necessary.
And every star was a virtual genre unto him or herself. And this obviously is heavily oriented toward the contract system and toward these kind of long-term contracts that the major stars would sign.
Where's Mr. DeMille shooting?
Stage 18, Miss Desmond.
Thank you, Jonesy. And teach your friends some manners. Tell him without me, you wouldn't have any job, because without me, there wouldn't be any Paramount studio.
You're right, Miss Desmond.
Go on, Max.
The studios would loan their actors back and forth, but that was just like trading in grain futures, The actors were, as I understand it, largely properties then, and treated as such, though very deferentially, and lived marvelously.
That was really very good indeed.
You think so?
It was absolutely terrific. It was really wonderful.
It was shit.
There we go again, Billy.
It was false. Didn't you notice? I want to do it again.
You'll never do it better.
I'm ready.
Chief? Let's do it again.
We're gonna do it again.
Bitch.
The studio system gave more people more turns at bat, more chances to play, because you worked for one studio, and they made a lot more movies. And if by chance you made one that was lousy, by the time they figured out how lousy it was, you'd already made 2 more anyway.
And remember, darling, I don't work before 10 in the morning and never after 4:30 in the afternoon.
The struggle between creative individuals and a strict studio system was also very evident in the case of the contract studio director.
Honey, could you put that other hand up around your throat?
Here, only talent guaranteed a degree of freedom from interference by the studio boss.
As Harry Cohn said, I get 5 guys I trust, and I don't talk to them when they're making the movie. And he said, the other guys, I tell them exactly what to do or I throw them out.
At the B level, the emphasis is on genre and formula, and it's without question the emphasis is on efficiency, just turning out the product like sausages. When dealing with top talent, you're dealing with people who have a certain notion of their role in the process, and they're aware that they're producing top product. And there was a lot of very creative conflict and negotiation that went on, particularly above the line, particularly involving producer, writer, director, star.
Mr. Von Elf, am I to understand that you consider this scene complete?
I do.
Well, I don't. You call that directing?
That is what I've been calling it for 32 years.
To be a director, you must have imagination.
Whose imagination, Mr. Shields? Yours or mine? It will be done your way, but not by me, and not by any other director who respects himself.
Howard Hawks had the greatest technique. If a producer came on the set, he would simply say to the prop man, hey, come on, bring a chair over here. And he'd say to the producer, come on, sit down, let's chat. And everybody else would go off the set. And the producer would talk, and in about 5 or 10 minutes, he'd realize that nobody was working. And he would also realize that nobody would be working until he left. And so sooner or later, he'd say, well, I'm not talking to you, and he'd get up and go.
Without question, there were any number of individuals, we can go back to, kind of von Stroheim and work our way up, and we can run out that litany of filmmakers who were done in by the constraints of this dehumanizing, highly industrialized, profit-motivated system. But the more I look at it, the more I tend to see the system as enabling as it was constraining.
Whoever supplies the money is the enemy. The studio's no different. There's always that tension. Listen, on The Godfather, I'd go up to Francis Coppola and I'd say, this picture, Bob Evans and I have been discussing it. We need another action scene. The Toll Booth murders. Francis didn't want to shoot that scene. He said, look, I don't want to go over budget. If I shoot that Toll Booth scene, I'm going to go way over budget. It's bad for the studio. I said, Francis, forget about the goddamn studio. Shoot the scene. Picture needs to be opened up a bit. Just shoot it and shut up. I think out of that tension comes better movies.
Ruthless, conservative, tyrannical, even vulgar, the studio boss was the father figure of the system, sometimes possessed by an uncanny intuition for mass taste and a tireless devotion to studio production. However, the Paramount lot, unlike its competitors, had no such figure. Rapid turnover of studio chiefs in the 30s meant that a degree of control was left to its strong roster of highly successful directors. Paramount's reliance on its essential creators led to German filmmaker Ernst Lubitsch taking over all studio operations in the mid-30s.
I think it's an artist's studio in the 30s in a way that no other studio is. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that two of the founders of what eventually became Paramount, Jesse Lasky and Cecil B. DeMille, were both filmmakers. There was a tremendous amount of creative responsibility that was given to people like Sternberg in the 40s, to people like Lubitsch and later Billy Wilder, Preston Sturges in the early 40s, that these were individuals who had a tremendous amount of control over their careers, relatively speaking. It built production units around, say, a von Sternberg, who did a series of movies with Marlene Dietrich and used, again, the same creative personnel on film after film.
The studio system could do that, but when they found particularly talented people who could work together, they put them together in a unit and said, okay, give us 2 mysteries a year, give us 2 musicals a year, give us 4 westerns a year. And I think that a style then developed for particular producers and directors, which is very difficult to duplicate today.
destruction in Europe caused by the Great War allowed the studios to internationalize their system. Paramount in particular established strong European ties in both Germany and France. Contract director Joseph von Sternberg discovered Marlene Dietrich in Germany while making The Blue Angel. The studio immediately signed her up for what were to be 6 movies with von Sternberg back on Hollywood soil in the early 1930s.
Dietrich, she knew exactly how she wanted to be lit. She'd been lit by von Sternberg, and she had gotten this certain kind of look from a high light coming down. And she knew exactly where she wanted that light up there. She was the only one that ever asked me to change the light up there. She thought it would be better if I moved it that way or this way. Von Sternberg developed a kind of a lighting that was very, very interesting and was different from what other lighting was, and it was important to change things.
And at that time, German film was really the best, especially, I think, modern in that they were way ahead. So all these Germans, Lubitsch and von Sternberg and Marlene Dietrich and, Billy Wilder, Fritz Lang, and naturally I didn't start out working with them just as a draftsman, but it was a great learning period.
Quite literally, top executives from Paramount, and particularly Paramount and Universal, would regularly go to Europe for what were perceived over there as talent raids.
Art is international. So tonight we find him looking at a European picture starring a young Hungarian girl, Franziska Gall.
Stop the picture a minute, Dixie. Get me Budapest. She beat, it's 5:30 in the morning in Budapest. You can't get that girl out of bed.
And why not?
Foreign operator.
Get me Budapest. Miss Franziska Gall. G-A-A-L.
London operator.
And of course, we're not importing movies. What we're doing is importing the talent that develops in those other countries.
Hello? Franziska Gall? This is Cecil B. DeMille in Hollywood, California.
Who?
Cecil B. DeMille, Paramount Director, speaking from Hollywood.
Cecil B. DeMille? Oh, yes.
We want you to come to America for a picture. I want a fine, emotional actress for the part I have in mind. You'll have to leave in 1 week.
1 week? Oh, you Americans.
Styles and techniques are being imported and appropriated and transformed to accommodate this particular industrial system.
Superficially, it may have seemed as if the major American studios were simply operating as large factories, mass-producing dreams for expanding foreign markets.
They were factories because they manufactured things. And if I'd been in Detroit, I might have been an automobile salesman or a mechanic. But in this town, they made movies. And everything in the town was connected with the movie business.
It was a manufacturing system where they had parts that they could bring in, and the parts were actors and actresses. They were on staff. They were there. You had scriptwriters, you had directors. They were there. And all you did was to put these together, like automated manufacturing in the 30s, just like Ford or General Motors.
But it really wasn't a factory system. A factory system makes the same product over and over and over again. Each Ford looks like every other Ford. But with cinema, the problem is to make a sense of the assembly line for motion pictures that will all be different. Unique combinations of stars and screenwriters and action and narrative. The genius of the studio system is the ability to make and minimize that risk, to make a system that could make picture after picture that was the same, but always different, always better, always more fun, always more outstanding. What makes great culture, great popular 20th century culture, is the ability to practice over and over and over again.
I was a 10-year-old kid in school, and I worked on the Paramount back lot on the Swing Gang at night. There was a depression all over the world, every place in the world except Hollywood. And they wanted the product that came from Hollywood, so there were jobs for everybody. No, I don't know anybody was ever out of work.
They would make, in the height of the era, the 30s and 40s, 52 films a year. It's not a unpredictable number. That's the number of weeks in a year.
Unless the picture came out about every week, they had no product, and the people in Singapore were not entertained.
Everything just went crazy when sound came in. We had to do pictures day and night and just get a lot of them out because there's a big demand, and we didn't have the pictures out, so we just had to make a lot, something like that.
They had an assembly stage where we built the sets. The minute they finished that set, it struck, moved out, and the other ones moved in. And that's the only way they were able to do it. And I can remember they had 3 8-hour shifts, day and night.
Charlie, stop that goddamn construction! All right, let's go.
And I went almost 50 years without a day off.
By the 30s, set construction was the only motion picture craft to have been unionized. This decade of frantic film production was marked by Hollywood's first strike action by a completely unprotected labor force.
You see, when we started making those films so fast in the early days of sound, we finally just got fed up on it, the photographers, and we formed a union.
We said we would like to join the IATSE, and there was dead silence. And in about 10 seconds, one of the producers said, "Now, girls, you don't need to join the IATSE. You're going to get everything that everybody else gets." And I thought to myself, this is really not true. The women certainly had no standing except for the stars in the studios in those days. And it is still a man's world, and it's still the old buddy game. There is a glass ceiling. I do know that they do not want women in vitally important positions.
Even though they kept saying, why did we have to strike? We could all work it out. But you never could work it out. They never wanted to give up anything, their autonomy, because it was important to them.
All writers are children. 50% are drunks. And up till very recently, writers in Hollywood were gag men. Most of them still are gag men, but we call them writers. It looks to me like a try for power, Mr. Brimmer, and I will not give them power. I'll give them money. I won't give them power.
But real power was not the studio bosses to give. Hollywood was merely the place where the movies were made. These corporations were actually run from New York, where less glamorous corporate presidents dictated movie budgets, studio policy, film distribution, and publicity. It was East Coast President Barney Balaban who ran all corporate affairs for Paramount from the mid-30s, by which time the company was already a vast multinational with nearly 200 listed subsidiaries.
The story with Barney Balaban, evidently, is that he was encouraged by his mother to get into the business because she was quite impressed by a business in which people paid cash ahead of time, before they met the product. So she saw these nickels and dimes and quarters going across the transit and said, "It's a good business to be in. I like this business."
In the lobby, more crowd, and still more crowd.
In an era when we think of business people just winging it, he hired a statistician from Columbia University. And, it was a statistician's job to get figures reported out from all the theaters all over the world and distribution figures as best they could with the constraints of the telephone at the time, and have those reports on Barney Balaban's desk when he arrived.
And when you finished working on a film, whatever you did, the brass, the money would come out from New York to see it before the negative was cut, which was the final thing, and the picture was shipped to New York. So you would be faced with another group, not the guys that were running the studio.
Usually the Eastern offices would trust the executives in the West to make the pictures that they wanted to make. In that respect, the authority was pretty much divided. But the ultimate authority was back east.
The stars were the Louis B. Mayers, the Adolf Zuckers, the men, mostly men, on the scene. And they were created as larger-than-life, all-powerful corporate beasts, while the true powers remained invisible.
I've just been speaking with New York.
Behind the scenes, unknown to the public, and were able to maintain their positions of power for decades.
This studio will fall without me.
Take a break, Monroe.
This is a waste of time. I'll be talking to New York. We'll see the studio doesn't fall.
It's the star system applied to the industry. Although Louis B. Mayer was much more famous than Nicholas Schenck. Nicholas Schenck operated the company, operated the theaters, operated the worldwide distribution, and in the 1940s fired Louis B. Mayer.
Ultimately, it was owning cinemas that secured real economic strength. The large companies all owned theaters, and at the height of the studio era, 94% of their investment went into this real estate. The big studios were really extensive theater chains, making movies simply to fill their own seats. It was a monopoly, actively encouraged in the early 30s by President Roosevelt's National Recovery Act, designed to help America out of the Great Depression.
He basically allows the studios to develop what economists call a mature oligopoly, to create a cartel of companies that are complicit with one another in utterly controlling a market.
The five majors broke the United States up into 5 geographical parts. Lowe's, the parent company of MGM, and RKO had New York City and parts of the East. Paramount had the Midwest and the South. Fox had the Far West. And so they would trade amongst each other. The studio might only be a few hundred acres in one place, Los Angeles, but if you own 1,500 movie theaters, that's a hell of a lot of real estate. Paramount would have the best locations in Chicago, the best locations in Detroit, the best locations in New Orleans, the best locations in Memphis.
Warner Brothers did not own as many first-run theaters in major metropolitan areas as Paramount. And since those major metropolitan theaters for Paramount generated much of its capital, Paramount made much more sophisticated, the term that was often used to talk about its product was more slick, more sophisticated than Warner's. Warner's was emphasizing more of a kind of Midwestern and rural and smaller urban clientele. This affects the kind of movies that the company's made.
I had an original story kicking around Paramount. My agent told me it was dead as a doornail. But I knew a big shot over there would always like me.
Paramount was much more likely than Warner, say, or Fox to adapt a literate bestseller.
All right, Gillis, you've got 5 minutes. What's your story about?
The way Paramount saw its audience within this kind of larger sense of the studio system, in terms of exhibition, distribution, had a lot to do with the kind of product that it made.
Exactly what kind of material do you recommend? James Joyce? Dostoevsky?
I just think the picture should say a little something.
Oh, one of the message kids. Just a story won't do. You'd have turned down Gone with the Wind.
No, that was me. I said, who wants to see a Civil War picture?
We've got another bond to buy. We've got another bond to buy. The bonds we bought before bought the bond.
The major studios may have seemed unstoppable. The first crack in the system came with World War II. In the early 40s, to help finance the war effort, the U.S. government radically lowered tax thresholds. Suddenly, individuals earning more than $200,000 a year had to pay a 90% tax. Top Hollywood stars, therefore, had to find ways of maintaining their income other than as salary. Crucially, this meant breaking those all-important exclusive studio contracts.
I know, for instance, with Stolen Life, Betty Davis was the producer on that. Warner's they decided they were going to give some of their top stars a chance to get capital gain, and so they gave her job of being the producer. They also gave Errol Flynn, and he got a capital gains thing on a picture that I wrote called Cry Wolf. He didn't care, but Betty said, okay, I'm a producer, I'm going to act like one. They should have known that this would be what she would do.
An agent named Lou Wasserman, who represented MCA, got the idea with Jack Benny on radio and then later Jimmy Stewart in the movies to incorporate the stars, one of the pillars of the system, have them set up an independent company and then pay the money to the company rather than to the star, hence it would be taxed at approximately half the rate.
With major company movies going to company-owned cinemas first, independent theaters were unable to compete. They could only show studio films after they were played out, and were also forced to book the studio's entire output, good or bad. So even though the majors controlled only 16% of American cinemas, they were winning 90% of the nation's total cinema box office. In the mid-30s, Roosevelt's National Recovery Act was declared unconstitutional, but it took until 1948 for the Supreme Court to finally put its nail in the system's coffin by ordering theater-owning studios to sell their cinemas and function as distribution and production companies only. The classic studio era was over. Paramount was the first to consent, and as a result of divesting some 1,500 cinemas, its profits dropped from $20 million to $6 million in 1 year.
Well, the studio system was so efficient that it was an oligarchy, and the government came in and said, no. It was much more efficient when the studios made the movies, distributed the movies, and exhibited the movies. That ended in 1948 with a Paramount decree.
No more theater holdings, no more cash flow, can't pay the overhead, you can't maintain these contract personnel, the factory can't be run.
When you owned theaters, you knew that you had a seller, that a picture would go in and do so much money and you could depend on that. Now without the theaters, you didn't have that insurance. So there was a tendency to cut back on production because of that. And when you cut back on production, then you cut back on your list of stars and writers, directors, producers.
Well, the separation of the theaters from the studios took place at the luckiest time for Hollywood that ever could have happened. Because it happened at the time when television was coming in and ruining the theaters. In the mid-40s, movie theaters in this country played to 90 million people per week. In the late 50s, it was down to 16 million per week. That's what forced the studios, in the main, to cut back on production.
So like the railroad business, thinking they were in the railroad business, not the transportation business, and staying out of the airline business. The studios thought they were in the movie business, not the entertainment business. So when television came on, they got very frightened. I can remember growing up seeing ads or seeing logos on RKO theaters and Lowe's theaters saying something to the effect of, don't watch television, go to the movies.
What the studios decided to do was, since they basically had a lock on, literally, international movie distribution, they had an absolute lock on domestic in the U.S. and Canada. And what they would do would be to continue to distribute movies. They would finance movies that would be produced on their premises. They would lease the premises to the quote-unquote independent producer. Obviously, they would invest in the picture. That investment would be returned.
We thought the independents were kind of second-class people, because we were with the majors and we were with the big time. And little by little it sort of dropped off where the majors became rental outlets for the independents, and they became the big ones.
A producer, I guess he's more of a businessman, named Harold Murish, came into the company, a wonderful guy and a very good businessman. He made the first deal where an actor got 10% of the gross. I think it was a picture with Burt Lancaster, I think, where he got 10% of the gross. And then Jimmy Stewart, somebody made a 10% of gross deal with him from the first dollar. And that made the actors your partners.
Then in 1951, a couple of sharp New York businessmen, Robert Benjamin and Arthur Krim, took over United Artists and set up a whole system just to do that, not to own theaters, but simply distribute on a worldwide basis productions done by stars, by directors, other independents.
Exclusivity was what made the studio system work. And once there were non-exclusive contracts proliferating, which was true by, say, 55, the studio system was officially ended.
The actors were beginning to be appreciated by the audience, not for their general appeal, but for their particularity. And every effort was made within this system to stamp out particularity, individuality, and the only reference was to what had been successful in the past.
Since we're here in friendly conclave, how about the contract? Come on now, it's growing whiskers.
Well, I'm having trouble with it.
Trouble? What sort of trouble? You tell me. I've got broad shoulders. Charlie, people can speak frankly to me. You're in a position which entitles you to make the highest demand, so please, you tell me your innermost thoughts.
I don't want to sign the contract.
When I first came here, I was completely ignorant of the movie business. Had never been in a studio. About 6 months later, I was under contract and lasted a year and a half. It turns out that they could have no respect for somebody that they paid $150 a week. So they were really not willing to cast anybody that they caught on that kind of bait.
Who are you? You some kind of special aristocracy because the female public wants to make love with you? Who are you with your dirty, unmanicured fingernails? And what? What are you without Hot Federated behind you? I built the studio. I, with my brain and my hand, I ripped it out of the world with my brains and my hands. And who are you?
So I have some experience with these throwbacks to the 40s, the 30s and 40s, and they were still attempting to do that. But very few of the people that I was under contract with are survivors of that experience.
I'll break you. I'll break you like
I think it's one of the great aspects of Hollywood, the genius, that they could retransform the system as it's going on, despite government intervention, despite a great social change in the society in terms of suburbs, and despite the coming of a new technology, maintain their power based on distribution and production only.
The triumph of TV in the 50s forced Paramount to create VistaVision. The production of epic movie spectacles was designed to combat the 40 million small screens already in U.S. homes.
Behold his mighty hand!
The end of the 50s saw the death of ace movie showman Cecil B. DeMille at a time when it seemed inevitable that television would continue to steal the cinema audience. Paramount had rapidly and successfully expanded into TV production to cushion its movie losses. But the early 60s, with some exceptions, produced few movie classics. For every company, this was a time of uncertainty and loss of direction.
The great tradition of Paramount, whatever it was only what the executives who ran it at that time made it. But that all ended when television came, and for a while MGM was the company that made movies that cost nothing and did nothing. Paramount was in deep trouble. The movie business kind of ended and became a vestigial appendage of the entertainment business until the television group came in and realized entertainment was entertainment.
It was concern for future survival rather than a glorious past that prompted the studios to begin stripping their own assets. Costumes, props, and valuable memorabilia went to auction or were junked, as were their extensive reference libraries. Paramount went as far as to sell all the movies it had made before 1949 to Universal. Outside business conglomerates, who did see value in what the studios had and might still produce, began shopping for the beleaguered companies. Paramount became the first major film company to be bought by a conglomerate when it was purchased by Gulf and Western Industries in 1966.
The studios clearly were doing very badly on their own. They were simply out of money. I mean, Paramount was broke. So if a conglomerate came in, that at least represented an infusion of cash.
They come out of the Harvard Business School, and they know pictures within 6 months, or at least they think they do.
There was concern, what do these people know about the movie business? But the movie business was in the toilet. So what matter did it make whether they knew anything about the movie business? People who were running the movie business in the 60s had screwed things up so badly that I think many people in Hollywood felt, listen, new blood, irrespective of what it represents, is welcome.
Even way back, 70 years ago, I always thought that the attitude of the executive, the people that ran this business, was that it was going to collapse in 2 years. So, goddamn it, let's make the most we can out of it. Let's get all the money we can right now, and let's not waste any on things like research and all that, because it's down the drain. And it still exists. They're still afraid that 2 years from now they'll be out.
Economic parameters are often good in a creative sense. Therefore, I have always believed that you create a financial box, you put the creative people inside the box, including yourself, you run around the box as fast and as often and as crazy as you want, but when you break open the box and the financial structure falls apart, then you have somebody come in with a hammer and hammer the box back closed and continue. And if you don't do that, you may have a very short career. Or your company may go broke. Or both.
Charles Bluhdorn, president of Gulf and Western, so fell in love with the movie business that in the first years of his control of Paramount, budgets soared.
He caused to be made some mind-bendingly expensive pictures, such as Darling Lily and Paint Your Wagon. Those two pictures together were flops of incredible dimensions, and they'd break any normal person's heart. But he didn't give up. I mean, he decided, okay, I may not be a genius at filmmaking, but let me see these guys in Hollywood, let's see what they can do. And all of a sudden, every time a picture opened up, like Love Story, there were lines around the block. Every time you went to the movies in that era, it seemed like you were surprised. You were surprised by the look of the picture, what it said, like Midnight Cowboy, the music, like Harold and Maude. There was always something that was new. Why? Because the companies were disorganized, because the staffs were so small, because in the late 60s and early 70s, basically all rules in our society had been thrown away. And everything about The Godfather was in some ways innovative. It looked different, sounded different. It changed the face of filmmaking because it became the first of what is now called an event picture. Now, the success of The Godfather brought also was a portent of what was later to happen, and that is that pictures that did well in the United States all of a sudden would do well overseas. And the picture, of course, became a blockbuster overseas. The casting was very unorthodox. Everyone assumes, well, Al Pacino, Diane Keaton, Jimmy Caan, obvious choices. I mean, when Charlie Bluhdorn, the president of Gulf and Western, first saw the test of Pacino, he was screaming about, get that out of the picture!
That's a terrific story. We have newspaper people on the payroll, don't we, Tom? They might like a story like that.
They might. They just might.
It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business.
I do tend to see that, kind of 67, 68 to 75 as a charmed interval, kind of the last interval before the rise of the new Hollywood.
You
video cassette, cable technology, and the shopping mall multiplex cinema. It was the decade of the younger-than-ever youth market, the George Lucas and Steven Spielberg family blockbuster. Powerful talent agencies such as CAA emerged as important power brokers, and a new management at Paramount once again addressed the need for change.
We were TV guys. It was kind of worse than being a deprived ethnic group. We were TV. We weren't invited anywhere. It was terrific. And we just had to do what we did, and we used TV in the pejorative sense, people, like John Travolta and John Badham and Barry Levinson and all of the people today who are the major motion picture people we used back then when they were all like in the ghetto with us. With the exception of Raiders of the Lost Ark, most of our successes were things like Elephant Man, Ordinary People, In Terms of Endearment, and Saturday Night Fever, and I don't know, I can name 10 others. All little movies made with new people, new directors, new actors. We went after the little movie that became the big movie. Our philosophy was, do what everybody else was not doing.
Stewardess, how soon do we land?
Oh, it won't be long now. Try not to worry.
Nowadays, a director like myself gets hired just for the individual project. So it's much more of a free-for-all. What this means, of course, is that talent, whether it's acting, writing, directing, or whatever that's in demand, is able to demand more money. But it also means that there's not necessarily a continuity of style that comes out of one studio, because there are so many diverse talents working. And I think that nowadays, as a result of the discontinuity, there's probably more onus on the creators of the picture than there was in the old days.
The degree of independence that one achieves with a certain amount of success is the true reward. The most important issue of success is to have that freedom to choose your own projects, to be independent of what a studio's conception of what you should do might be.
I'm a director now, and I'm getting $1 million to direct a picture, and the actor's getting $14 million. Was he going to listen to me? No, really. When I say to him, Eddie, give me a little feeling. He said, well, I don't feel like it today. Let's do it tomorrow. Everybody's too independent now. The directors are the auteur. You can't even talk to them. They're the boss, and you got to talk to them. It's tough. I don't care who you are. I don't care who the studio is. In Zanuck's day, they couldn't, because Zanuck would tell them they're going to kill him.
Process is depersonalized. There is no one voice speaking for the studio too often. Meetings, when you consider a script, everything is tested, researched.
The newspaper. Pick a story, any story. Immigrants protest budget cuts and literacy program. Human spirit overcoming economic adversity sounds like Horatio Alger in the barrio. Put Jimmy Smits in it and you got a sexy stand to deliver.
Committees are not very satisfying entities to work off for a filmmaker, and they're not conducive to creative decisions.
How about mudslide kills 60 in slums of Chile?
That's good. Triumph over tragedy sounds like a John Borman picture. You still have a happy ending on it, the script will write itself.
I was just thinking what an interesting concept it is to eliminate the writer from the artistic process. If we can just get rid of these actors and directors, maybe we got something here.
I know every studio chief in Hollywood personally, and if you have dinner with any of them, the one thing they'll say is, look, business is bad, it's because we're making lousy pictures. Product is mediocre. Part of the reason, a key reason the product is mediocre, is because of the committee system. It never existed in studios until this moment in history.
I see Paramount Disney particularly as trying to get back to something more systematic, something more efficient, something more industrially integrated.
Did we just see the beginning of a new life form?
Yes, Captain. We witnessed a birth. Possibly a next step in our evolution.
I wonder.
Well, it's been a long time since I delivered a baby, and I hope we got this one off to a good start.
I think we gave it the ability to create its own sense of purpose. Out of our own human weaknesses.
And a lot of foolish human emotions, right, Mr. Spock?
Quite true, Doctor. Unfortunately, it will have to deal with them as well.
There is a return to integration, but it will never be that kind of vertical integration of production, distribution, exhibition. The fact that a Batman or a Star Trek is as liable to be experienced by people as a video game or action toys or a comic book or a novelization, the way that the system can be integrated now is so much more complicated. Paramount owns the largest book publishing company in the world, Simon & Schuster. One of its largest subdivisions is devoted exclusively to Star Trek. And on that score, one wonders whether the system could ever be as systematic, as efficient, as productive as it once was.
Take us out.
In 1994, Paramount was purchased yet again, this time for $10 billion by Viacom and Blockbuster Entertainment. Now a global media powerhouse of enormous proportions, the takeover shows a new confidence by big business in the major studios and their ability to reassert their power and influence.
They've created a giant cultural imperialism where they've managed to make, where one town virtually has managed to make its cinema world cinema. Hollywood system is the best system to screen your movie. It may not be the best system to make your movie in, but it certainly is the best system to deliver it to an audience with one of those stamps stamped on the front of it.
You have to have the kind of resources that a Paramount has, or a Warner's, or a Universal, to weather a period of what could be big losing films. With a consolidation of power with the major studios, I think it's inevitable that the studios will begin to put more people under contract so that they're in a better competitive position, that they don't have to bid on the open market.
And looking back on it now, we really had it very good in those days, because now it really is a rat race. And I'm glad I'm not connected with it.
The new system demands success. It rewards it, but it punishes failure as well. That's the answer. That's the soundbite.
Nice job of cutting, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Shields.
Nice work.
Thanks.
Beautiful production.
Beautifully written, Jim. Beautifully produced. Harry, tell Chapman his photography's perfect. Beautiful.
Wonderful, wasn't it?
And congratulate Walter on his sets, Lucian on her costumes, and Boris on his score.
Yeah, I like the music.
And tell the director he should have his head examined. He shouldn't have shot the picture. He should have shot himself.